Hello, 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 and welcome to the Blue Oval Podcast. I am Ben Weissel, and joining me, as always, Garrett Allen. How's it going, man?
Ben, congratulations. How does it feel to be a winner? I mean, you've always been a winner because you get to work with me every week.
Yes,
But
that's why. Yep.
yeah, but how does it feel to be a winner in other aspects of life?
You were when we were doing our sound checks. You're like, yeah, you're sounding really good, and I'm like, yeah, this isn't my actual voice, which is probably why it's sounding good. It's because I'm like hoarse from all the yelling I was doing last night during the Eagles game, and they were all positive yells, which I've never watched a game where I was like nervous about how good it was going. I was like, this can't
Yeah,
be real that our defense is playing incredible. We're scoring points. We're making the best quarterback on earth look like Mitch Trubisky right now. It was fantastic.
yeah, it was closer to Nathan Peterman than Mitch Trubisky. Yeah, well, if we have enough time at the end of the podcast, we will chat about the Bards for about 10 minutes. Just because we have a little bit of a lighter week, but not so much of a lighter week that we don't have anything to talk about. So first off, before we do though, Spotify +2 ratings there. Thank you to everyone who did that. I think I sent out a little SOS and you guys responded. So thank you. Go check
Mhm.
out YouTube. Shout out to Wyatt, who's now been our podcast producer, who's now doing a couple clips for the podcast. We now have Lauren coming on, who's been doing a lot of clips on social media and YouTube as well. So go check all that out. We're on TikTok now. Go follow on TikTok. And that's all I've got for all the admin stuff. But Ben, before we actually get into any of
Awesome.
the actual results from this past weekend, um, we have a little bit of piece of news. Why don't you take it from here?
Yeah, so Nike obviously is one of the biggest players in professional running, is certainly in America, and they have basically restructured their pro groups into one called the Swoosh Track Club, featuring three different locations and three different head coaches. We knew Mike Smith was going to be stepping away from NAU and focusing on the professional ranks. He will lead the Swoosh Track Club location in Flagstaff. Then in Provo, Utah, you'll have Coach DJ Taylor taking control of that team. And then Jerry Schumacher will head Nike's Eugene based location. This is a different approach than we've seen from really any. I mean, I guess On has like Boulder and then Europe. Like they kind of try to thread the same team slash club name, but we haven't really seen this approach in the U.S. where you have the same club like in name only really, but led in by three different coaches in three different places. It's an interesting use of, I think, their branding to keep it under one kind of name. And you have three of the best coaches in the entire country in three of the most desirable places to train. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Well, I will say that I think Under Armour has that Under Armour Dark
Oh, that's
Sky and
true.
Under Armour
Yeah.
Baltimore. Although I don't know, are they condensing that? I don't really know what. I don't think they actually are condensing that. I still think it's at least two separate groups there. I don't know if there's like a third that I'm not familiar with, like
But
the
those are different
Baltimore.
names, right? They're not the same like
Right, right. It's
name, right?
not technically one group, right? One specific training group. This makes perfect sense. This also follows what I was told in the summer is that Nike wants is that they're going to have multiple flagship places in
Mhm.
what I was told was Colorado, Utah, Flagstaff. They would definitely have one in Flagstaff. Turns out they did have one in Utah, except the only difference is that it's actually going to be in Provo, which makes sense because Diljeet Taylor, who already had Nike ties, that was almost like a given at that point. Apparently not one in Colorado, but they are going to keep one in Oregon.
Yeah.
Going to keep it in Eugene. Makes perfect sense there. What they're doing there. Um, if which location, which Oregon, NAU, or BYU, which of these three schools is the biggest winner that comes from this development? Because obviously
I
it's
think
not directly related to pros, but you have to
yeah.
imagine that there's some benefit there that happens when you say, "Hey, and look, we get to do this as collegiates."
Yeah, I think it's BYU because I think out of those 3, I mean, obviously Mike Smith's already leaving. So and Flagstaff's always been a big location for pros. So I don't think there's that same uh difference with Mike Smith. I mean, I think this was always going to be the case. With Schumacher, I don't think he was going to there he wasn't like a threat to leave after just getting to Oregon. But I think Diljeet Taylor is someone that you could realistically look at and say like, "Hey, maybe she could get an offer somewhere else, whether it's a different school, whether it's a professional group that she could end up like leaving BYU because of some great offer. Now that she
Mhm.
has a pro group under her direction in Provo, I think this means that she's much more likely to stay at BYU. And so I think that makes them the biggest winner because I think the longer they can keep her with the program, the better it is for them.
That is a great take, and I never thought of that. And I think, just to clarify, they already did have a pro group. It was like,
Right.
I guess, that tailor-made group
Yeah, yeah.
that's ultimately now being, given a Nike
Rebranded.
backing. It's being rebranded. It's actually being supported by an official brand. But that's a great point. Yeah, at some point you could imagine she just creates this alumni network of star level pro after pro after pro. And, now she has Simone Plord under her direction. She has um,
Bailey
oh, who
Hertenstein, right?
I don't know about Bailey Hertenstein. I don't. Maybe I could be wrong, but who is the former Stanford runner Donahue, Ella Donahue?
Yes.
She's under her as well. There's maybe one other name who I'm not even thinking about. But yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. This keeps her there. I think anyone who's at BYU can now say, hey, now you can also train with elite level pros. I think is a huge win there. Um, so yeah, I agree. I think BYU is the biggest winner there. Do we have any other notes we wanted to make about Swoosh Track Club though?
No, I thought it was interesting, and you mentioned this that Boulder didn't get a
Hmm.
location. I thought that made a lot of sense. And Coach Carlson, I thought that was one of the appeals in my mind for him moving to Colorado was it was going to be much more. It was going to be a lot easier for him to start and build a professional club in Boulder rather than in Knoxville. So I wonder if that comes at some point, but I think it is notable that that there isn't, and that they're seemingly going after the non OAC locations where they can kind of have a little bit more of a foothold.
And that was my only thing. It's like I imagine there's already OAC there. There's I guess Tin Man, although I don't really know if Adidas is even backing Tin Man
Yeah.
anymore. So I don't know how much emphasis you really want to put on there. But regardless, point stands. Interesting development on that aspect. But potentially the more interesting development from this past weekend was a guy running 3:48 in the mile. And I know what you're thinking, Garrett. We already saw that. We already talked about this the other weekend. Like this is nothing new. Ethan Strand already did that. And I'm not talking about Ethan Strand. I'm talking about Virginia's Gary Martin going to the Milrose Games, placing fifth in what was unquestionably the fastest indoor mile race known to man, and running 3:48 in the mile, NCAA number 2 all time behind only Ethan Strand. Ben, can you react to A, Gary Martin flat out running 3:48, but B, the fact that we've had two men run under 3:50, but neither of them have run 3:49?
Yeah. I don't think there's a happier person on the planet than Gary Martin right now
Yep.
because I'm pretty sure he's an Eagles fan as well. So you
Oh, that's
run
right.
3:48, then you watch your team win the Super Bowl. That's a pretty good weekend. Yeah, I Strand, you could kind of see this coming, right? 3:48 always seems crazy fast, but after what he did in the 3K coming off of the cross country season, they like we talked about last week, there was in retrospect you could have seen the signs, right? It's harder to say that about Gary Martin, although we did see him put together some great improvements in the fall. He was clearly a lot stronger this year than he was in years prior. But this 3:48 on the heels of losing to Marco Langon and Liam Murphy in the mile it just this one seems much more outlandish, and the fact that, like you said, no, he didn't run 349. He didn't just like barely get under 350. He went well under 350, running 348 in a field with some of the best in the world and holding his own. And I think this shows that the NCAA again is just on a different level in terms of the middle distances than it's ever been before. I mean, we've always seen the 800 guys be able to, men and women, be able to step right up to the world level right away. And we're starting to see that creep up into the mile on both the men and women's side, really. But especially with these 348s, it's just showing you how good you have to be to compete at the very top level of the NCAA. And I don't know if this tells us like, hey, is he like the co-favorite with Strand? Because that race against Langon and Murphy's still in the back of my head, but it tells me that in a fast race and maybe in the 3K, he could be one of the few guys that has the real possibility of winning.
I struggle to digest this performance because, like you said, he got stronger aerobically. He ran the 736 3K back at Boston, but the 350, like his PR previously was 354, and then he just ran 354 a couple of weeks ago, losing to both Liam Murphy and Marco Langon, who, frankly, don't get me wrong, those guys are awesome. Like, they're all-time talents in the 3K, and we'll talk about them later. But if you're running 348 in the mile, you should probably be able to beat those guys as well. Not run 6 seconds slower. And so that's why go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Langon and Murphy are having fantastic seasons. I don't want to diminish what they're doing. They are running incredibly well. But to your point, if you're running 348, you should be able to beat those guys.
Right. Well, specifically in that race, specifically in a race that was wanting 354, right? Yeah. It's like, well, wait, how did that all of a sudden happen? And so that's why I'm struggling to digest this, because how did you go from 354 2 to 3 weeks ago to dropping 6 seconds in a mile race where you're already at the elite level? And it's just hard for me to fathom. And it makes me wonder, like, hey, Strand is not the exception. Strand is now the bar. Mm-hmm. Strand is, and Martin, those guys are now the bar of what guys should be yearning to achieve, right? And so, because there are a handful of other guys, debatably Nathan Green or Adam Spencer or maybe someone else, where you kind of go through this whole thing and you go, well, man, wait, if this guy's running 348 and this guy's running this fast and this guy's running this fast, then shouldn't they be able to run this fast too? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where I'm at. I'm in complete awe. I did not see this coming from Gary Martin at all.
Yeah, I feel like this was more of a breathtaking result or paradigm shifting result than the Ethan Strand one. Because one person does it, man, he's just having an unbelievable year. He's moved to another level. But two guys doing it, and one guy in Martin who's always been super talented, but we never expected to see this kind of result from him in his entire career. And this is where you're like, okay, this is just where the NCAA is going. And to that point, I was curious your thoughts. Do you think with the faster times that we're seeing in the mile, we've had a few different kind of corrections happen in terms of how these miles / 1500 meter races are run? Like, so we've seen them go really tactical. We've seen people try to speed them up. Do we think we're going to see a more pedal to the metal approach in the mile for the national championship with these guys who have just been able to run these outlandishly fast times?
If anything, I think this means it's going to become way more tactical, right? Because if I'm someone who wants to be an aggressive front runner, well, now all of these guys are being able to run this fast as consistently, right? Like Abel Teffra, who we'll get to in a moment, ran 352, right? And he's NCAA number 8 all time. There's guys this season, like Fouad Massaoudi ran 352 this season. He's NCAA number 7 all time, and yet he's only like the 6th fastest in the NCAA this year. It's something
Yeah.
ridiculous. Like there's some kind of weird stat there that one of our writers was able to put together. But I think if anything, this means that guys are going to be way more tactical. Because if you tell me, hey, listen, like if you think you can drop these guys, well, good look. Now they're all just as fast as maybe some of the best guys in the NCAA history. So I actually think it makes these races even more tactical moving forward.
Well, yeah, I guess I should rephrase. Do we think, because yeah, I agree. I think if you're someone who hasn't run under 350, you don't want it to be a honest effort, right? You want it to come, because if it's faster than that, you don't fancy your chances against guys who are running 348. If you're one of the guys who has run 348, or even Nathan Green who's run 350, do you say, "Hey, look, we're so much better than everyone else," and maybe they might not even be, like, maybe we're gonna see more times like this, and that's the crazy things. But like, we're able to run at a clip that very few people in history have ever been able to run at. Do we just push it and like say, "Hey, at the very worst, we're gonna finish in the top 3 because no one else outside of this small group is gonna be able to hang"? I'm curious if we see that approach where we're seeing a lot of guys running the low 350s, but really no one touching that like below 350 outside of 2 or 3 people.
Yeah, no, I think my point still stands, and I think you kind
Yeah,
of said it. Like, these guys, I think eventually we're going to see other guys run 350 or 351 this season, and I think at that point it's like, okay, then in a championship race, the tier system there, yeah, 348 to 350 is still a significant amount of time, but in terms of tactics and execution and trying to drop guys and surging and championships, it all just kind of meshes together at one point and just says, hey, if you're fit enough, like you can at least chase some of these guys if they try to be aggressive. I
yeah,
still just think it's going to be a way too risky of a move. I think it's going to be riskier than ever before. Martin showed us that, like, hey, you don't just have to be Ethan Strand to run this fast. You can be Gary Martin too. You can be, whoever all these guys are. So, yeah, I think across the board, the championships will be in the mile more tactical.
yeah. I don't disagree. I do think it could just take one person though to push the pace in such a crowded field where everybody's so good that if someone wants to try to stand out in any particular way, we could see this happen. And everyone's going to be incredibly fit in this field where they could push the pace and try to front run like a 350, 352. And then we could see something really, really special at NCAAs. But I like I said, I don't disagree with your points. With that said, let's move on to the women's mile where we saw Wilma Nielsen run another 425. I don't really know what else to say. Like I again would like to see her do it in a mostly collegiate field, like, and maybe run 432 and just beat some of her top
Well,
competitors.
she did
In
do that earlier this
yeah,
season, which wasn't an amazing field, I
right,
should say. But
right, yeah, but outside of that, it's like she's done everything you could ask for. She's running just incredibly well. The consistency, clearly running 425 twice, is there. Are you ready to like put her in that top contender group at this point? It just feels like such a sudden ascension that I don't know if that's why I'm having a hard time putting her at that top tier status.
I feel better about her now than ever before.
Yeah.
The 425, having it run twice,
Hmm.
it leaves me incredibly encouraged that, hey, okay, this is not a fluke. This is all
Yeah.
legitimate. Like she's able to do it not once, but twice. And more importantly, like if you go back and watched her in that Milrose race, she gets stuck in the inside of the rail in the front middle of the pack, and she is stuck there the entire time. She doesn't have the flexibility to move. She can't get out and jump around and make a surge. She is at the whim of whatever the pack around her was doing. And the fact that she was still able to run 425 in what was truthfully actually a tactical race, at least in terms of how it played out, I thought that was incredibly encouraging. The fact that she was in such a poor position where she really couldn't dictate her race or how it was supposed to be run, and she still ran 425. I was really pleasantly surprised about that. And if anything, I'm now getting to a point where I'm almost willing to say I'll take her as the national title favorite.
As the that's what I was gonna ask. You would put her as the favorite at this point.
I think so. Like not confidently, not comfortably, maybe not even alone, but I think I'd say that yeah, she's a national title favorite.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so who do you have in that group then?
Well, we haven't seen Kazmierska yet, and knowing
Yeah.
Oregon, that they'll probably delay her, so I'm not like totally dismissing her yet. But until we see her, I can't really say anything much about her. But I think it's her and Kimberly May at this point.
You're okay. Interesting. So it's funny because Nielsen hasn't even run the fastest in the NCAA this year, but we have her as one of the
Oh, that's
favorites.
right, because Laura Pellicaro, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because yeah, Lauren Pellicora, as you mentioned, she's the one with the fastest time in the NCAA. It just feels like one of those years where there really isn't a consensus, and I think obviously Nielsen running 4:25 twice is incredible, but we've seen a lot of women run under 4:28 so far this year. We have Flockhart, who I think clearly can run with the best. You have just so many accomplished women. I mean, you look down this performance list. You have Melissa Riggins in 10th, who's run 4:30. You feel confident about her chances. You have like Kimberly May, obviously you mentioned as one of the favorites. There's just so many people here that I think could end up taking home this title. That I guess that's why I maybe have a little bit of a weird feeling having Nielsen as my favorite, as one of the favorites. But you got to make some group of favorites, and it would feel foolish to leave her out of it. It
Yeah,
just feels
I'm
like that
just
would be 10 people.
yeah. No, I don't know if it's 10 people though. I think it's May and Nielsen. Like I'm not ready to put Pellicoro in there yet. I'm not ready to put Chamberlain in there yet. I'm not ready to put Ayilda's in there yet. I'm not ready to put Flockhart in there yet. So I think it's a May Nielsen combo, and that's what I'm going with for now.
All right. All right. Let's move on to the men's 3K, where we saw previously mentioned Liam Murphy and Marco Langon run 7:35 and 7:36 in the 3K, both earning top 10 NCAA all time marks. I know Strand has had an incredible season, and we've seen incredible performances from Parker Wolf, now Gary Martin, but I can't think of many other seasons that compare to what Murphy and Langon have done. They have run almost every event and run it spectacularly. They have been just rock solid, and they've beaten some very good names through all of this. It's I think with all the noise of all the other great performances, it's gotten lost. But they're having like some all-time great season so far.
Yeah, this is a like historic 1-2, season for these guys. I mean, they both went under the previous record, or I don't know if Langen did, but I mean,
I
they
think he
both
did.
is he technically under
All
the
right, yeah, it's close.
I don't know if it was officially under the previous record, but let's see, 8-7.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think you might have just missed it.
I don't know what the previous record was. I don't think he got it, but regardless, the fact that six guys are 7:36 or faster this season is wild. Um, Question for you in terms of Langen, in terms of like what he, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering that name. I'll try my best here. Um, is he in that elite tier, in the same tier as like Murphy right now? Because he's run 13-14 this
Yeah,
season, 354 and 736. He beat Murphy and Martin in that
yep.
mile. Is he in this? Is he in that same tier as Murphy right now?
I feel like we're holding on to our priors if you're saying that he's not, because everything that he's done this season would tell you he is.
Yeah,
But we haven't thought of him in the same group as Liam Murphy in the past, right? Like he's always been a level below. But I think he's proved this year that he's still he's the 1B to Murphy's 1A, but he's not the 2 anymore. He's like a tier above. And so I think you got to put Langone in that top group. I mean, he's someone that you feel like could realistically challenge for all American positions in 3 different races. And that's a pretty wild thing to say. And in the 3K, I think he's someone that you would consider as maybe not in that top tier favorite status, but the tier below certainly.
What in terms of like that 1B group, I'm going to list off just a quick handful of
Yeah.
names. Are these guys in the same tier as Langon? Okay. Ethan Strand,
No.
Gary Martin.
So I think Gary Martin, actually, you have a compelling argument to say that they're not
Mm,
worlds apart. You look at their resumes, it's not that different. The 348, obviously notwithstanding, but and the 348 is certainly a big thing. But I don't think they're as far apart as you would think.
okay. Okay. I wasn't sure. I was like, I might get him with this. What about Nathan Green? Is he in the same tier as Langan or is he higher?
He's higher. He's higher.
Ronan
There's
McMahon
just a
Staggs.
consistency. I would say McMahon Staggs is a tier below.
Interesting. What about Teffra, Masaudi, and Birnbaum? And Salmon. Throw Salmon in there.
I think Salmon and Teffra. Oh, so yeah, I would say Salmon and Masaudi are same tier. Teffra, I would go below slightly, and then who was the other one in that? Who
Birnbaum.
was the other one?
Birnbaum.
Beer
Yeah.
bomb, beer bomb below. Teffra, I think you can make an argument for being in the same group, but I think beer bomb is definitely a tier below.
Okay. Two more names. Yassine Abdallah and Adam Spencer.
I think Abdallah, same tier. Mm, I would I honestly think you'd have to put Spencer slightly above, but based off of this year, you can make a compelling argument for the same for the same tier. But I Spencer's past experience is doing a lot of heavy lifting for you to say that he's above what Langon's done so far.
All right. Well, we're going to move off of that. I just wanted to make that a thought experiment and kind of put Ben in an uncomfortable position. So let's go to Abel Teffra, who ran 3:52 in the mile at Boston. Great pacing job from Tanoda Matsatsa, his teammate. And Teffra now sits at NCAA number 8 all time. Took home a fairly convincing win over a really solid field, deep across the board in that first heat. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think he's just the consistency that he's showing is really exciting to see. We've seen the flashes, but it just seems like every time he steps on the track at this point, it's a great result. And I again, I think you probably put him in that same category as Langone, just because he's just been they're really the more I'm thinking about it, there's nothing that he could have done differently. Like, he's won races, he's run fast times. Like, sure, he could have run 3:49. Like, yeah, that'd be great. But like, there isn't any poor performance in his resume this year. He's done everything you could ask for. Maybe I would like to see him beat a couple different guys, but he's beat the guys that you've put in front of him. So I yeah, he's been probably one of the more under the radar guys who, I mean, very realistically could finish like in the top 4 at NCAAs.
Well, I was gonna say, so like, what's his ceiling? Like, what's his ceiling for the season, both in terms of times and like placement and All American finishes and yada yada yada.
Yeah, I think in terms of times, I think 3:51 is certainly doable. Maybe 3:50 feels a little audacious at this point, but I think 3:51 is doable. As far as placing at NCAAs, I think you could say third is probably his ceiling. I think Strand is so far and away better than everyone else in terms of just his combined speed and overall strength. I think Nathan Green's probably also a category ahead of Teffra, and then you're racing against Martin and Masaudi and maybe a couple others, Solomon and a couple other guys for that third or fourth spot, and I think that's where he's put himself in that position to be in.
Okay. Okay, I don't disagree. I think that's. I mean, he's certainly elevated his fitness. Like, I know everyone's going to be
Yes,
excited about Matsatsa this season, but Tefra's looking. I don't want to say just as
really good.
good, but not far off. Like 3:52 is a legit mark.
Yeah, and
So
in that same race, we saw Iowa State duo Galdino
mhm.
and Kipiego run 3:54 each,
Should be noted
and
Devin Kipiego,
Galdino's
Darius's
building
younger brother.
Devin Kipiego. Yeah, yeah, yes. Good clarifier. Um, yeah, and Emmanuel Galdino's building off of his really impressive double from a couple weeks ago, follows that up with a 3:54.2. He's I think someone that has some more room to grow and is going to be a very potent piece of Iowa State's DMR if they decide to go with him. And this is an Iowa State DMR that's looking potentially very, very scary.
Yeah, the DMR is huge. I mean, Galdino validating his 147 355 double from back in January is huge. You know, because we know he can double, and now we know like he can really be a national caliber kind of guy. Devin Kipiego, just not in terms of like this season, but in terms of like the long term value that he's going to bring to the table.
Mhm.
This is huge in terms of his 354 mark. Just in terms of like biggest winners from a program standpoint from this weekend, it's Villanova and then it's Iowa State. Like there's really like Iowa State
Yeah.
had a really lot of great wins. I think Darius Kipiego also ran 146. I want to say this past weekend. I don't know if that was something that we were ever able to catch on.
Yes.
He
Yep.
did. He did
Yeah, he
one.
ran 146.5.
Yeah. So something to keep in mind there. But otherwise, yeah, big weekend for Iowa State and a lot of big implications for Iowa State, positive implications, other than hey, we just had two guys run really fast.
Yep. Yeah, and hey, this is what Iowa State does. It comes to January, February, and all of a sudden you see a bunch of Cyclones firing at all cylinders, filling up the leaderboard in the 800 in the mile distances. So it's yeah, they're winners. It seems like every year around this time. Let's move on to an 800-meter performance, though, on the women's side. We saw Smilla Kolbe of North Florida run 2:02, breaking the program record there. Someone who has been very strong in the past, 2:01 previously. This past, I think it was past outdoor season. Um, what do you think about her in this very crowded 800 field on the women's side?
Yeah, I mean she's someone now who I think A has validated her fitness from last spring, which I think is important, right?
Mhm.
She had that kind of sudden rise. It was in the postseason, and we're like, oh, this is a really nice Cinderella story in terms of her ability to kind of be an underdog and make it to the national meet. But you kind of want to see like, hey, was that just kind of like a lucky streak or is this legit? And she ends up running 201 last spring and now 202 this winter. She ran 203 earlier this season. She ran 437 earlier this season. So like there are hints that she was getting and inching closer back to that top tier form. And now she has experience under her belt, albeit on the outdoor oval at the outdoor national meet.
Mhm.
But I kind of like what I've been seeing from her in terms of momentum. Now it should be noted she soloed that 202. Like
Yeah.
it wasn't even close. Like
No.
I watched the race. It wasn't even remotely close. So I don't know how she's going to do when you have eight other women or seven other women along you in your prelim heat and you have to battle them and they're all running right next to you shoulder to shoulder. That's a very different circumstance and very different setting that she may not be familiar with, at least on the indoor oval. But in terms of fitness and momentum and peaking for the postseason, her fitness is certainly in that correct trajectory.
Yeah, it's interesting. You can go one of two ways with your analysis on someone soloing a really fast time. You can either say, "Hey, they didn't even need anybody out there to chase that. They were able to run a fast time and hey, you put someone in front of them, they're going to be able to run even faster where they're not having to pace themselves and do all that on their own." And I think that's very true. I mean, for in my experience, I've seen a lot of people run significantly faster than what they've soloed after getting into a competitive field and be able to chase after someone. But on the other hand, in an 800, and especially in the indoor on the indoor oval, it can get so congested, and you're watching where you're putting every single step so you don't trip on somebody, and that can end up being a deterrent, honestly, and the solo effort feels a lot cleaner. So I think there is a lot of potential for her to go much faster than this in a like more competitive field, but there's also some potential that maybe this was just a perfect setting for her, and we'll see which way she goes.
Yeah, completely agree. Completely agree. I'm going to transition us off of Kolbe and then go to Virginia Tech. And at Virginia Tech, we saw the VT men have a really nice evening, Friday evening, where Nick Plant makes he runs his first 800-meter race of the season with a 146 mark. Teammate Christian Jackson runs a very, very small PR of 147 low. And then in the men's mile, George Cootie secures a very narrow win in a time of 355. One, Nick Plant, where are we going to put him in this All American conversation? Is he in the All American
Mhm.
conversation? And then two, DMR. Is there all of a sudden now a Virginia Tech DMR that could really make things like spicy?
Yeah, it depends on how much they go for it, right? I think they would kind of need to depends on what your definition of spicy is, but I think they would need to put most of their top guys in to really push towards like a top three, top four kind of finish. I do think that I mean, based off of 800-meter results, they have the guys that they're going to be able to uh, make it to the national meet. It's just I struggled to see a way that they're able to compete with the best teams in the country just because they don't have a miler who can run 352, and that's kind of what you need to be able to go up against the Washingtons, the Iowa States, the um, Oklahoma States of the world, and I don't think they're quite there yet.
Yep. Yep, that's fair. Okay. I Yeah, I agree that I don't think Plant's going to be running the DMR is the ultimate caveat
No,
there.
yeah,
So that's ultimately there. If they ran a full DMR, I think they'd have like Georgetown potential from last year kind of thing.
sure.
Um, so there's that caveat. Plant though, in terms of his
Mhm.
status within the NCAA, he runs an indoor PR 146. Where do you see him now in the national picture? Has anything changed?
Yeah, it's tough. You look at this performance list and it's really interesting. There's a lot of inexperience in here.
Mm,
And even some of the guys that are a little bit older, haven't been at this high of the national leaderboard in their careers. Like you look at someone like Kyle Reinheimer, Darius Smallwood, like these guys who have been around for a little bit, you haven't seen at the top of the NCAA before. And even someone like Hassan Abdullahi, like he's running way better than he ever has. He's always been like like a fringe All American guy, but not someone you consider as, hey, this guy's one of the favorites to win the title. I think Plant has a good mixture of, hey, he's been around at the top of the NCAA for a couple years now. Now he hasn't run anything explosively fast, but I would trust him to be in that final more than almost anybody in this top like 15 really of this list. I think there's maybe one or two other guys that you would feel more comfortable in terms of saying, hey, yeah, they're definitely going to make it through prelims other than Plant. So I think Plant is an All American favorite in my mind.
that's great analysis. I didn't even think about that. I mean, yeah, you're right. You kind of go down the list. Let's say Hassan. Let's look at the top 16 in the men's
Yeah.
NCAA for the 800 right now. Abdul Ali Hassan, right? Probably someone who we feel pretty. At least we feel like we know what we're getting out of him. He's a veteran.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Dayton Carlson, maybe. It kind of depends on how you view him and what seasons you're looking at. Darius
Yeah.
Kipiego, we like his experience. Rivaldo Marshall, we like his experience. Nick Plant, we like his experience. But that's about it. I get to about
Mhm.
five guys, and then everyone else, I go, man, I'm not confident that these guys all are going to know and feel comfortable about what they're going to see in
Yeah.
Virginia Beach in March. I don't know how comfortable I'd be with a lot of these guys. In fact, really, if you go down pretty much all the way until the 28th guy in Kamar for Carson, you could say that about everyone else. So it's you're right. It's not a lot of experience, which I didn't really think about And it still won't be a lot of experience when someone like Katoti Kadali is on the stage,
Yeah.
or even Sam Whitmarsh, who's never run at the indoor national before. So something to consider.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely wide open, right? It doesn't feel like, I mean, Hassan's obviously run 145, which is pretty far ahead of anybody else so far. But even then, you don't feel like he's worlds better than anyone else
No.
in this field. So I think it's going to be a really, like, you could barely make the finals and then end up winning the
Yeah.
national title. I think that's the kind of year that we're looking at in the 800.
All right. I think we've done it. We've capped it there. We're about at 40-ish minutes right now, give or take, with some editing that Wyatt may have to do. But Ben, we got about 10 minutes to spare here. All right. Let's talk about the Birds. Let's talk about the Eagles. Can you walk us through your emotions quarter by quarter as we kind of go through for last night's Super Bowl win?
Yeah, so I was at my brother-in-law's house, and I'm there with a lot of my wife's family, and yeah, first quarter comes through, and my biggest I'm pretty nervous after the first quarter. It's a great, like, everything's going the Eagles' way, and they weren't up nearly as much as I thought they could have been. I was like, all right, if you're gonna have a quarter where you shut down Patrick Mahomes, you got to be up like 14, you got to be up 20, like you got to really take advantage of it, because he's coming back and he's going to make this like a tight game when it shouldn't be. You should be out of reach. And so that was my nerves in the first quarter. The second quarter, the Cooper DeJean pick six, I feel like that's when you really started to believe, okay, this could actually happen. And the defense just continued to stand up, and the offense was fine. Like, Jalen was making the throws, he was great. He was really good. Barkley, they shut down, and it didn't
They did.
matter because we were staying on schedule. We weren't getting into third and longs. The O line was dominating the entire time, and you just, even when Jalen threw that pick, it just, I was frustrated, but there was a sense of calm, just like that they were just moving the ball at will, it seemed like. And Jalen didn't, outside of a couple throws, you didn't feel like he was having to do anything special. He was just making the read, throwing it, or making the read and running. Like, it wasn't like it didn't seem like it was that complex. So, I mean, after they go in at halftime, everybody's like, "Oh, the game's over. The game's over." I was like, "Absolutely, do not say
Uh-uh.
that." I was like, "I
Uh-uh.
don't believe for a second that this game is over." You being a long-suffering Philadelphia sports fan as well, you know that feeling, I'm sure, all too well. Of you never feel
Yeah,
too
mainly
comfortable.
just the Sixers. I mean, I was at
Yeah,
the Sixers when they blew the 32-point lead to the Hawks.
yeah.
Six Steelers, like, it's kind of like a constant middle of the road kind of emotion. But Philly, yeah, like I'm like sitting there, I'm like, I wouldn't feel safe. So when did you feel safe? At what point in the second half did you be like, oh no, we are going to be Super Bowl champions? Like, we are confidently going to be winners of the Super Bowl.
It was the Devonte Smith, I think, catch, the like 50-yarder.
Bomb, the dagger, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that point they were up 34. I think it was 34 nothing. And yeah, I think it was that was when I started letting my guard down. I was like, all right, like, I don't really know how to process this, because I've never really experienced this kind of joy this early in a game before. So I don't really know how to handle this, but, and I'm like in a room full of my in-laws, so I'm like, I can't like freak out. I gotta behave like somewhat normally. And but that was when I was like, yeah, I mean, it would take a miraculous meltdown or miraculous comeback to be able to change the result at this point. And I mean, quite frankly, I think if the Eagles wanted to, they could have shut the Chiefs out in this game. Like, the defense was so good. I've been saying I think it's the best Super Bowl uh defensive performance ever. Like, when you consider now 22 points at the end of the day, I think is what is probably gonna people are gonna look at that and be like, no, it's not. But you consider who they're going up against, and when the starters were all in for the Eagles, they gave up they scored more points then they let up through those 3 quarters when they were going full out. And against Patrick Mahomes, arguably the best ever or the second best ever, like I don't think there's another defensive performance that you can put at that same level. And so it was like that third quarter was awesome, and then the fourth quarter I'm just letting it all wash over me, which was just it was such an unusual experience.
I have so many comments to this. So, one, I would argue that the Seahawks just crushing the Broncos a few years back. That was maybe 8 years ago, maybe if I'm getting my years right. I mean, that was like a 40 to some 6 game. Like, I mean, it was a
That was all, but
complete.
that was also against what, a 50-year-old Peyton Manning.
He had something ridiculous like that season in terms of his touchdowns, right?
I thought he was.
Didn't
I thought that was at the tail end of his like when he was not playing super well.
let's see. His Super Bowl I don't know. I don't know. That was
I do think that's like the
2014.
only one in modern history that you could point to. But I think the what the Eagles did was similar quality against a much better offense and head coach and like coaching combination. I will say too.
In 2014, he threw for 39 touchdowns and 15 interceptions, 4,700 yards. So now he was the
Yeah,
year
that's
before he
pretty
threw
good.
55. The year before he threw 55 touchdowns and 5,400 yards. So FYI. But
Yeah, fair enough.
regardless, the defense, you're right. The defense was a historic defensive
Yeah.
performance. Like, I mean, I remember this. I remember them showing this or mentioning this on the broadcast. It was something insane. Like, the Eagles had not blitzed other than their front four the entire game until like
Entire game.
midway through the fourth or something stupid. Like,
Yeah.
it was that's an unreal stat. The offensive line couldn't do anything. The defense looked old. They looked washed, frankly.
Yeah.
And the lack of receiving help on the offensive end finally caught up to the Chiefs. Juju Smith-Schuster likely well past his prime. Kelsey, well past his prime. Hopkins, well past his prime. Someone else who I'm not even thinking of.
Worthy
Xavier
looked
Worthy.
good. Worthy
Worthy
looked
was the
like
only one. He was
yeah.
the only redeeming quality that they had. And I just don't know, like, as a GM, how did you go into this season being like, yeah, this will do?
Well,
Like,
I think if this is where they felt the Rashee Rice loss, like I think if
fair.
you have him,
Yes.
I think that's because he was so good. Like he was so good early as a Rashee Rice owner, fantasy owner in multiple leagues. I was so upset when he went down because he was unguardable in that offense. And I think that's really well, that loss really hurt them. But O line on the O line like perspective, yeah, they were no match. And it's funny, you go into this year with the Eagles and the D line was a little bit of a concern. You had Bryce Huff that they signed for 3 years, $51 million, who was inactive tonight. They scratched him because they had too many other good guys in front of him. And it was guys like Nolan Smith stepping up, Josh Sweat stepping up, Brandon Graham coming back from a torn triceps, Jalix Hunt, a converted safety from 4 years ago, looking
Yeah.
like an all-pro defensive lineman in this game.
Yeah.
Like it was stunning to see the way that they have improved throughout the season. It's been one of the greatest stories. And I mean, they had a lot of help on the back end with the corners and safeties have hurt, and the linebackers have gotten a lot of acclaim. And so they've certainly benefited from that. But the way that defensive line has improved, led by Jalen Carter, was I think the biggest difference in this game.
Yeah. Just incredible across the board. I know someone who may have put a lot of money on this game, and that someone had Eagles money line. They had Jalen Hurts MVP. They had Jalen Hurts
Wow.
first touchdown,
Oh
and
my.
they may have also won a square of their like the whatever the score squares.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
someone who, I mean, hey kids, don't gamble. It's bad.
That's a
Don't do
banner
it.
night.
Let's just say that guy was extremely happy. So
Yeah, I did a little bit of hedge bets. I wasn't betting on the Chiefs to win, but I was doing a lot of player props, and none of those really hit. And I didn't care. It was a great night, regardless. So it did nothing to dampen my mood whatsoever. But yeah, it was a fantastic night. It's something that you have to enjoy because your favorite, one of your favorite teams winning a championship in any sport is so exceedingly rare that you got to soak it up whenever you get the opportunity.
Welcome to the club. Welcome to the club, man. All right. Well, Ben, I'm going to wrap it there. Go subscribe on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple. Go leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple. Go leave us a review and a comment on Apple. Follow on Instagram. Get a subscription for TSR. New updated rankings for D1. And, of course, Valentine invite coming this weekend. We're going to have Jan on the camera getting photos. We're going to have Will Argia getting post-race interviews. We're going to have previews and predictions, and it's going to be a great across the board. But Ben, I think that's all I got.
Alrighty, until next week, Garrett. I'll talk to you.
I'll talk to you.